Places in America where the road goes quiet, where legends still breathe, and where the line between truth and folklore blurs. From haunted highways and cryptid sightings to stories that have echoed through generations, State of the Unknown takes you deep into the shadows of America's strangest corners. Hosted by Rob, this documentary-style podcast blends immersive storytelling with real research to uncover the tales that refuse to fade. If you like your mysteries murky and your folklore just a little too real, you might already be living in the state of the unknown. Listen now wherever you get your podcasts.
Research and recording of Canadian Creepies happens on the shared land and traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe peoples, many of whom continue to live and work here today. This territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties. A key treaty governing this territory is the Dish with One Spoon Agreement. This treaty between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and Haudenosaunee people binds them to share and protect the land. Subsequent Indigenous nations and peoples, settlers, and all newcomers have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. We all share the responsibility of ensuring the dish is never empty, meaning we must take care of the land and the creatures we share it with. Welcome, wanderers, to Journey Down the Crooked Path, a place where the stories are stranger, the shadows stretch longer, and the things that go bump in the night might just be listening. I'm Amanda Joy, your guide into the eerie, the forgotten, and the downright bizarre. Here, we step off the well-lit roads of Canadian Creepies and venture into the murky corners of history, folklore, and the unexplained, where the whispers grow louder and the truth is never quite what it seems. So let's take a deep breath, watch your step, and whatever you do, don't look back. Once you start down the crooked path, you never know what might follow. What makes for a good mystery? Perhaps there's a murder in a place that's unforgiving. Maybe there's lost treasure. How about a terrifying curse? Sometimes a story starts because someone makes a rash decision that they can't undo. All of these aspects can make for some great storytelling. Fiction gives you a clean trail while real life hands you a mess to figure out. But fantasy aside, what I'm about to tell you is one piece of Canadian lore that combines all of these into one story. And it starts with two people who head into the mountains, but only one comes back. The story of the lost lemon mine was first told by Senator Daniel Edwards Riley in 1946. Riley worked as a school teacher in the Maritimes before moving west to Alberta in 1882, looking for adventure. It's here where he met a man named Lafayette French. French was born in Pennsylvania around 1840 and moved to the Canadian Plains to become a buffalo hunter and to trade with Indigenous communities. He had set up posts at Blackfoot Crossing and High Wood River area, near what is now High River. Now, French, he had seen many gold rushes by the time he reached Alberta, including the Fraser River Gold Rush in 1858 and the Wild Horse Creek Gold Rush of 1864. And just like many American Albertans, he too caught gold fever and had outfitted many prospecting parties of his own. When Riley arrived to town, French had become his part-time employer and had told Riley his lost lemon mine story many times. Later in life, Riley would actually finance a few of French's summertime searches for lost gold. 2 years before his death, he had published the story of the lemon mine in the Alberta Folklore Quarterly, and from there it was expanded upon in articles from Thomas Primrose, who was a reporter working for the Calgary Herald and the High River Times. Now, over the years, this story has changed hands many times, and some of the details have been, well, exaggerated if not changed entirely. Or perhaps some have been lost to time. But this particular version I'm about to tell you is considered the best-known retelling of the lost lemon mine story. The story goes that in the spring of 1870, a group of prospectors from Montana set out to Tobacco Plains, which sits along the Katuni River. This area stretches from Gasnier, BC to Eureka, Montana. The group consists of a man named Blackjack, a prospector credited with finding the gold that kicked off the Caribou Rush, and his partner, a man named Bill Lemon. Their plan was to pan the North Saskatchewan River for gold. However, they found nothing. No gold at all. So the two decided to head back to Tobacco Plains. Now, this area was known to be part of the Blackfoot community, which were known to attack prospectors. So the two men had joined a traveling party of Métis headed towards Fort Standoff. After a bit of travel, Blackjack and Lemon, they split off from the group and follow an old Indigenous trail up the High River Mountains. The trail followed Racehorse Creek through Racehorse Pass and eventually into Elk River Valley, which then flows into the Katuni River, which then leads into Tobacco Plains. When the men reached the headwaters of the stream, they found a spot where the three separated streams met. A crude map of this area is said to have been drawn by Lemon and marked this convergence. It is here where the men started to pan the riverbed, and lo and behold, they found it rich with gold and discovered a high rock ledge that was streaked with solid gold. That night, the two men argued about what to do next. Blackjack wanted to leave and return in the spring as the safest course of action, but Lemon, he wanted to stay and pan for as much gold as possible. The argument got so bad that it nearly turned to blows, but eventually they stopped talking and went to bed without coming to a final decision. Blackjack drifted off to sleep, but Lemon, he stayed awake, fuming over the situation, angry and stewing. He waited until he was certain Blackjack was asleep before Lemon slipped out of his blankets, crept over to Blackjack, and struck him in the head with an axe. Realizing what he had done, Lemon panicked. He packed up his things, built a large fire, and burned Blackjack's body and belongings. As Lemon paced around the fire, he started hearing moans and other unsettling sounds coming from all around him. And he is now convinced that he is hearing the spirit of Blackjack, already haunting him. Little did Lemon know that out in the bush, watching him were two Stoney Nakoda men, William and Daniel Bendo, who were hiding in the bushes nearby. They had been watching the two men the whole time. They had saw the gold discovery, they had seen the argument, and they had seen the murder. So they started making noise from the bushes, tormenting Lemon from their hiding place. At dawn, Lemon left the camp and he headed towards Tobacco Plains. After he left, the two Stoney men took what they could from the site and brought it back with them to the Stoney village at Morley, Alberta. There, they told the story to the Bearpaw chief, Joseph Bearspaw. Now, the Indigenous understood what a gold strike could mean for them. It would bring more white men who would come and cause trouble and push them out of their community. So, he told the two men to keep quiet about what they had seen. Meanwhile, Lemon arrived in Tobacco Plains after several days of travel and was racked with guilt. So he sought out a priest that he trusted and he confessed to the murder of Blackjack. During this confession, Lemon showed the priest a piece of gold, rich rock. So the priest went to a local Métis man named John McDougall and sent him out to the site to bury Blackjack's remains. According to the story, the site was pretty easy for McDougall to find, and he buried Blackjack, placing a stone Koran over the grave. But the Bearspaw's band also witnessed this, so they came into the site right after McDougall left, and they destroyed the Koran, removing any trace of human activity from the site. By the following spring, word of Lemon's discovery had spread, and a group of miners had convinced Lemon to guide them to the site. Now, Lemon tried to remember his way back and retraced his route, but he just couldn't remember. So, after days of searching with nothing to show for it, the miners started to doubt Lemon, thinking that he was trying to trick them and keep all the gold for himself. So, they confronted him. And with this, Lemon became so violent that the group restrained him, tied him up, and brought him back to Tobacco Plains. After this, Lemon left the area embarrassed to go live with his brother on a ranch in Texas, where he stayed until he died. Clearly, this expedition had failed, but it didn't discourage the priest who decided he wanted to try again to reclaim the mine. So, in 1872, he outfitted a new party of miners led by John McDougall, since he had already been to the site once before. The miners traveled to Crow's Nest and waited for McDougall, but McDougall was in Fort Benton, Montana, finishing some business before he was to join the group. On his way north, he stopped at Fort Kidd, which was known as a whiskey fort in southwest Alberta. The fort was known for serving rot gut liquor, which was a low-grade, unaged spirit that was cheap to make, but very painful to swallow. Bartenders would often serve it since it was cheap to make, even though it was often very toxic, containing turpentine. That night, McDougall drank himself to death, and with that, this mining expedition too was canceled. But that still didn't discourage the priest, who outfitted another party in 1883. Sadly, earlier that year, there happened to be a forest fire that raged through the whole area that they needed to search. The terrain was impossible to cross, so the miners turned back again. The following spring, the priest again set out another party. Lemon this time was chose to lead the party, but as he got close to the area, he became more and more erratic and unstable and eventually fled back home. So, once again, the search was abandoned and everyone returned home. Now the priest finally gave up. This is when Lafayette French took up the torch in finding the mine. During his first attempt, he became extremely sick and had to return home. For the next 30 years, he kept searching for the lost lemon mine. He had received some help from miners who had been a part of the priest's earlier expeditions, and from the Métis group that had originally escorted Blackjack and Lemon from North Saskatchewan River to the old trail. Yet, no matter what he tried, French had no luck finding the mine. There was a series of events that began near Pincher Creek and ending in High River that led French to believe the area was cursed. One winter day, a group of Stoney Nakoda people, led by William Bendo, took shelter at a ranch near Pincher Creek. The ranch belonged to a friend of French's named William Samuel Lee, and at the same time, French also happened to be visiting the ranch. When he questioned Bendo about the mine, Bendo refused to provide any details, but that spring, French promised Bendo 25 horses and 25 cattle if Bendo would take him to the mine, which Bendo agreed. The plan was to leave in the morning, but when morning came, Bendo was so overwhelmed with fear that he refused to go. In the winter of 1912, French once again tried to convince Bendo to go to the mine. Bendo and his group were traveling towards Morley and said that they would lead French to the site of Blackjack's death once French mentioned that a prospecting rancher and former fur trader named George Emerson was coming as well. But the night before they were supposed to leave, Bendo suddenly died. The Stoney believed that Bendo died because he agreed to reveal the location of the mine. They placed his body in a Red River cart and brought him back to Morley for burial. That same night, Bendo's son-in-law also died the same way. Now, with this expedition, French was already outfitted by Senator Riley, and so he decided that he would carry on without Bendo, and supposedly, French found the mine. So he returned from the mountains, and he stopped at Bar U Ranch in Alberta foothills, where he wrote a cryptic letter to a friend at Fort Benton saying that he had found it and would explain later. After mailing the letter, he rode west and made camp at an old log cabin about 2 miles from EP Ranch near High River. But during the night, the cabin caught fire. French was badly burned, but he did manage to escape, crawling 2 miles through the snow to Beddingfield Ranch. French crawled into the bunkhouse and put himself into a bunk where he passed out. That evening, the cowhands found him, and they loaded him into a wagon and took him to a hospital in High River. He was in critical condition when he arrived and asked to see Senator Riley. When Riley arrived, French said that he knew everything about the lost lemon mine and would explain everything in the morning. But he died that night, taking whatever he had discovered to the grave with him. French did die believing that the mine was cursed and something supernatural was surrounding and protecting the mine. Now, let's talk a second about the Stoney community. Jacob Bearspaw, the leader who had instructed his men to hide the mine, he had a son named Moses who took over as chief after his death. Moses had a son named King. According to King, the story is passed down from his father and grandfather. But Jacob only ever told 2 people where the mine was, his brother and his son Moses. Moses, though, believed that the gold would corrupt his son and never told King where the mine's location was. King was very vocal about his desire to find the mine, and so he started his own search in 1912, relying on bits of information that had been passed down to him from his father and grandfather. In order to move freely in the backcountry, he actually gave up his treaty status, and by doing so, he lost the financial protections that came with being a status Indian at the time. The only partner he ever had in this was a man named Jack Hagerman, who worked as a driller and a mechanic. King kept very quiet about his work and rarely shared any details about where he had been or what he had found. Tom Primrose, the writer, had once said that King swore he had found gold dust in the mountains. King also said that the mine isn't in the Livingstone Range, which is where most people believe the mine to be. He spent more than 70 years looking for the mine and died in 1979 at the age of 89 and was believed to be the last living link to the Lost Lemon Mine. He didn't leave any records of what he knew or had found. Of course, Riley and French's version of the Lost Lemon Mine are not the only ones. They're just the most believed and retold. One summer in the late 1890s, near what's now Coleman in the Crow's Nest Pass, a Blackfoot woman named Cloudwalker and her 11-year-old son came out of the woods in rough shape and ended up at the homestead of Florence Crossing's mother, who took them in and cared for them. Cloudwalker explained that she was from the Blood Reserve near Cardston, and that earlier that year, a man named Jack Leeming and his partner had come to the reserve for supplies. They had bought moccasins, and then they bought her for 2 horses and a Hudson Bay's Company blanket before the chief married them on the same day. Leeming, his partner, Cloudwalker, and her son left before sundown. They camped on the St. Mary's River, traveled northwest the next day, and camped near Lee's Lake. On the 3rd day, they entered Livingstone Range, eventually reaching an unfinished cabin at the foot of the low mountains. For months, Leeming and his partner panned at the nearby creek, while Cloudwalker and her son chopped wood, cooked, cleaned, repaired clothes, made moccasins, and smoked venison that Leeming brought back. And every day, Leeming returned with gold dust and showed her where he hid it under the floorboards in a buckskin pouch. One morning, he told her to build a corral. And when he went to inspect it that evening, his partner followed him with a rifle. A single shot sounded, and the partner came back alone, then ordered Cloudwalker to cook for him, packed food, struck her when she looked towards the corral, and tore apart the cabin searching for the gold, and told her Leeming wasn't coming back. Cloudwalker hid her son in the woods, hiding herself under a rock ledge, and later found Leeming's body at the corral with a bullet in his back. At dawn, she cooked for the prospector, waited until he was distracted, took an axe, killed him, and retrieved her son, dug up Leeming's gold, and kept a handful, placing the pouch on Leeming's chest before covering his body with brush, and went to the mine the men had worked at, put a curse on the diggings, and then used their last blast powder to bury the gold under the rubble. She and her son camped cold that night, set out the next day, got lost in days of heavy rain, crossed mountain streams, lost their pack horse after a grizzly encounter, reached rapids on the Elk River near present-day Sparwood, camped through another storm, tied her son's feet under his pony, crossed the freezing river, made camp on the far shore, traveled through the mountains and over Crow's Nest Pass, spent the night in a pine burrow lean-to, and finally reached the homestead where Crossing's mother had found them.
You. Still haunting the same old fast fashion? Time to dig up something better with Back from the Dead Goods, a Canadian small business where forgotten threads get a second life and sustainability meets spooky. This isn't just upcycled clothing, it's resurrected fashion with an eerie edge. Handpicked, reworked, and revived, every piece is as unique as a ghost story whispered at midnight. And because you're a part of the Canadian Creepies family, you get an exclusive deal. Use code Canadian Creepies at checkout for 10% off. Find them lurking on Instagram, Etsy, and Poshmark. Links are in the episode description. Give your wardrobe a second chance at life, if you dare. Looking for your next obsession? The Creators Collective Podcasts is your gateway to the dark, the chilling, and the downright fascinating. We're a community of independent podcasts with one goal: to share the best in true crime, paranormal tales, folklore, and unexplained mysteries. Whether you crave cold cases that won't stay closed, haunted histories that refuse to be forgotten, or stories that make you sleep with the lights on, there's a show waiting for you in the collective. And when you join us, you're not just listening to one podcast. You're stepping into a world of creators who love this stuff as much as you do. Check out the Creators Collective today. Follow the link in our show notes to discover your next favorite podcast. We'll be waiting for you. Let's take a moment during this break to talk about something that matters. Something that doesn't get to be background noise. The Anishinaabe-Moan word, Nikinagana, means we are all related, and we are. But relationship isn't just about words, it's about responsibility. Canadian author Naomi Klein once said, "It is not enough to say that we live on Indigenous land. We have to act as if we do." And one way to do that is by supporting Pay Your Rent, a grassroots mutual aid initiative that offers direct material support to Indigenous organizers across this land. It's not charity, it's rent. For those of us who aren't Indigenous to this place, it's a way to show up differently, to redistribute some of what's been taken. The Pay Your Rent Fund started as a one-time request for help in 2018 and grew into a nonprofit called Niki Nagana. Your monthly or one-time donation can help provide food, hygiene supplies, housing support, and resources for Indigenous-led resistance and community care. So if you've ever said, we're all related, ask yourself, are you being a good relative? Visit payyourrent.ca and find out more about how you can be part of something better. Now back to this case.
In 1961, Neil Nicholson wrote a version of the Lost Lemon Mine. Neil was a rancher, a World War II veteran, and a former Northwest Mounted Police officer from 1900 to 1905. And he said he heard this version, which is now archived in the Glenbow Museum in Calgary, from 4 frontiermen named William Olin, John Nielsen, Mort Holloway, and William Lee. In this version, Blackjack and Lemon were prospecting during the Wild Horse Creek Gold Rush of 1864, and having very little success, they went on to commit murders and robberies throughout the East Kootenays. It is believed that they collected a small fortune in stolen gold, resulting in a posse who went after the 2 men. Jack Black and Lemon fled east to the mountains, and not long after they were found by a group of Stoney Nautico people who were from the Highwood River area. Nicholson said that the Stoney group were traveling to their annual summer gathering with allies of the Contootie people. Lemon tells them that he and Blackjack had been ambushed by a group of Blackfoot warriors, and that these warriors were the ones who killed Blackjack, after the Stoney people found Blackjack's body nearby with a bullet wound in his back. Now, seeing the bullet, some of the Stoney people suspected that Lemon might have killed Blackjack, but they could never prove it. After meeting with the Stoney group, Lemon traded gold nuggets for supplies, asked for directions, before heading south for Benton, Montana. The same version was later retold by a few other people. One such was Sam Livingstone. Livingstone was a prospector and a trader who became one of the first farmers in Fort Hills near Fort Calgary, often referred to as Calgary's first citizen. Another person was Jimmy White, a prospector and miner who worked at Fort Steele in BC. His account was documented by Arthur Canton. John Hunter, who was also known as Chief Sitting Eagle, was a Stoney Nakoda resident of Morley, Alberta, and his account was documented by Calgary newspaper writer named Fred Kennedy. The prospectors who have passed down this version believe that Lemon buried his stolen gold somewhere on the eastern slopes of the Rockies, and despite having returned several times, Lemon was never able to find the spot again, losing all of his stolen gold. There was another account involving Colin Thompson, who worked for the Hudson Bays Company before becoming a pioneer, that suggests an alternative location for the lost lemon mine. One stormy day in 1894, 2 Cree men arrived at Thompson's door with 8 pack horses looking for shelter from the weather. At the same time, a trapper named Henning was also visiting the farm. The Cree explained that their band was struggling through a harsh winter and didn't have enough food to last the season. They were surviving on rabbits, grouse, and whatever other small game that they could find, but babies and elders had begun to starve. The band's chief had sent the 2 men to the trading post in Bowen to get some supplies, and they had been traveling for about 8 days. They were now cold, hungry, and exhausted. Thompson, though, noticed that they didn't have any furs, so he asked if they planned to sell their pack horses. The Cree said that they needed the horses to carry the supplies to their camp, so Thomas reminded them that the traders wouldn't give them anything for free, which is when one of the Cree men pulled out 2 buckskin sacks filled with raw gold ore. He was sure that the traders would accept this, so both Thompson and Herring asked where the gold came from, and the Cree men replied that this came from a sacred valley near a burial ground, and that the gold was only ever used in emergencies like the famine their band was currently facing. But when pressed for more details, the true Cree men refused to say anything else. Instead, they thanked Thompson for his help before they left, heading towards Bowen during the storm. Another story comes from Arthur Canton, who is deeply interested in the lost mine, believing that the sacred valley that the Cree mentioned might be the same place where Lemon found the gold. Canton also thought that this idea could fit French's version of the story. The Cree and the Stoney Dakota were close allies with the Iron Confederacy. Canton believed that they might have shared devotions for the same valley. So with this idea, Canton also carried out several prospecting trips of his own. By chance, a friend of Canton found what looked like a very old mine entrance in a valley west of Bowden in Red Lodge Provincial Park. This friend had been hunting bighorn sheep when he discovered this entrance, and knowing what Canton's theory was, he showed him the site. The valley was an overgrown trail which merged together with 3 streams, which matches French's story of where the mine should be found. Now, during this time of year, it was avalanche season, so Canton, knowing the tragic stories of Bendo and French, wanted to wait the following year to explore the site. When he reached the valley, he discovered that an avalanche had destroyed the trail leading from the valley to the cave, meaning that without proper gear or a helicopter, he couldn't reach the entrance, and he never managed to get inside the cave. Later, when Canton spoke to the staff at the Red Lodge Provincial Park's ranger station, he learned that King Bearpaw had been prospecting in that same area for over 20 years. The version, though, that most closely mirrors Lafayette French's account comes from a writer named William Godsell, a Canadian author who spent years collecting frontier stories, mining lore, and accounts from old-timers across the West. His work often stitched together oral stories from prospectors, ranchers, and Indigenous communities, and one of those stories was his retelling of the lost lemon mine. Godsell's version follows the same general path as French's, but he names different witnesses and adds details that he came by from people who lived through the area. In his retelling, Blackjack and Lemon had left Tobacco Plains with a group of armed men led by Emile Lanouse, a Métis man, and they worked their way along the South Saskatchewan River before heading west. At some point, Blackjack and Lemon split apart from the main party and followed an old lodge pole trail up High River towards the Rocky, while Lanouse made for the whiskey fort at Standoff. As the 2 men followed a stream that kept giving up gold dust, they traced it to its headwater and dug 2 shafts down into the bedrock. Those shafts produced even more gold. Then one of the horses turned over a patch of sod and exposed a large ledge of rock that looked packed with gold. Traders at Fort Benton later said that samples looked like solid gold with bits of rock mixed into it. That night, the partners argued over whether to stay and work at the site or head back to civilization and bring help. Blackjack wanted to go, Lemon wanted to stay. After the fight cooled off, they crawled into their beds, and once Blackjack was asleep, Lemon killed him with an axe. Godsell says that the Stoney witnesses were Calfchild and Medicine Owl. They saw Lemon unravel under the weight of what he had done and made things worse by whistling and moaning in the bushes. At dawn, Lemon fled, and the 2 Stoney then filled the shafts in and hid them with brush. Lemon rode back to Tobacco Plains, confessed to Father LaRue, and showed him a sample of the gold. LaRue sent John McDougall to bury Blackjack, and McDougall found the wolf gnawed remains and covered them with stones. As soon as he left, Stoney braves under Chief Bearspaw tore down the clearing and scattered the stones, wiping any trace of the site. From there, Godsell's story follows the same pattern of French's. Lemon led the miners to the mainstream, French got sick, Bendo died. Everything else pretty much lines up. The thing is, today mainstream geologists don't give the lost lemon mine much credibility, and the reasoning comes down to the rocks themselves. The front ranges of the Alberta Rockies are built almost entirely out of sedimentary limestone and shale. In that kind of environment, you don't get the quartz veins that carry big gold deposits. To them, the geology alone makes the story unlikely. Still, not everyone agrees with that hard stop. Some researchers have shifted their attention a little further west, across the provincial borders into the Elk River Valley in British Columbia. The terrain there is a bit more favorable for placer gold, and that small difference has led into a theory that Lemon may have misread his surroundings. If he was fleeing in a panic, confused, and exhausted, it's possible that he crossed into the Elk River drainage without realizing it. And treasure hunters who believe the lost lemon mine is more than just a story often point to a geological outlier tucked into the Crow's Nest Pass. The formation is known as the Crow's Nest Volcanics, and it stands out because it doesn't match the sedimentary limestone and shale that dominates the front ranges of the Alberta Rockies. To people who think the mine is real, this volcanic rock is the one place in the region where gold has a fighting chance of existing. This particular idea picked up momentum in 1988 when a university geological technician named Ron Stewart found traces of gold inside the Crow's Nest volcanics. Now, the amount that he discovered wasn't anywhere near commercial grade, but it was enough to prove that gold could occur in that specific rock. And for believers, that was a small confirmation that they needed. The discovery that Stewart made has branched out even further. Maybe Blackjack and Lemon didn't find a broad vein or a workable deposit. Instead, they stumbled onto a tiny isolated pocket of gold inside the volcanics, something unusually concentrated and easy to miss. And over the years, natural shifts in the landscape may have buried it, covered it, or changed the terrain enough that no one has been able to find it again. One of the most widely discussed historical explanation comes from the Alberta historian Hugh Dempsey, who argued that the gold was real, but the mine itself never existed. In this view, Blackjack and Lemon did not discover anything in the Alberta Rockies at all. They stole a large cache of gold dust from active miners in British Columbia during the gold rush era. When they crossed into Montana with sudden wealth, they needed a story that would keep them from being hanged for theft. The tale of a remote hidden mine in the Alberta wilderness became their cover. Lemon later breaks down. According to the theory, it is a mix of genuine psychological collapse and a desperate attempt to keep the lie going. Dempsey did try to reconcile Lafayette French's version with hard historical evidence in his book, Frontier Book No. 4, The Lost Lemon Mine, The Greatest Mystery of the Canadian Rockies. In his research, he found 2 newspaper articles from 1870 and 1888 that told stories strikingly familiar to French's, although far less dramatic. Both articles described events from 1868 when an American named French Lemon, spelled with 2 M's, was part of a prospecting party for 30 to 40 men searching for gold across West Alberta. As the group made its way to Fort Edmonton, they met a southbound party. Lemon and his partner, Old George, joined them and traveled together until they reached the area of present-day Nayton. From there, Lemon and Old George split off, heading west towards the mountains, hoping to find a pass that would take them to Wild Horse Creek goldfields. They did find a pass and crossed into the west side of the Rockies, where they panned a creek and uncovered promising amounts of gold dust at its headwaters. At that point, the 2 versions of the story diverge. One article said that Old George was killed by Blackfoot warriors, and Lemon escaped but just barely. The other claimed that Lemon shot Old George during an argument. Either way, Old George died, and Lemon traveled alone south to Joko Mission, just south of Flathead Lake. In the summer of 1870, Lemon convinced a group of miners to follow him back to the site. He led them through the mountains to what he insisted was the gold-bearing creek. It didn't take long for the miners to realize that Lemon was lost. When they confronted him, he broke down and promised that he would keep searching until he found the stream. For days, he led them through rough terrains without any success, and eventually the miners gave up and went home. Dempsey believed that the story was real, one that later came heavily embellished by Jean Leroux. Fake priest Leroux was a French-Canadian seminary student who fled west after a scandal and passed himself off as a legitimate priest until he was exposed. After that, he joined a band of Blackfoot and acted as both priest and interpreter for years. He had a reputation of being eccentric and for creating gold-related hoaxes, including at least one that triggered a false gold rush. Dempsey suggested that Leroux may have heard Lemon's tale and reshaped it, inserting himself as the priest from Jacques and relocating the mission from the Flatheads region to Tobacco Plains, which looks similar but sat 180 kilometers northwest. He also may have added the name Blackjack, a well-known prospector from the Fraser River and Caribou gold rushes, who likely met Leroux at Fort Edmonton in 1866, just to give the story a little more weight. The frontier was never just a place on a map. It was a world where people pushed into a landscape that they didn't understand, chasing luck, chasing escape, chasing whatever thought might change their lives. And in that kind of world, danger wasn't an exception, it was the rule. Men vanished in the mountains, camps burned, trails disappeared under storms or slides. Stories spread because people needed explanations for things that didn't make sense. And out of that uncertainty came the myths. The whispered warnings, the tales of gold that drove people mad, are places that didn't want to be found. Every version of the lost lemon mine carries some piece of that frontier fear. The idea that the land itself could turn on you, or that something older was watching from the trees. And maybe that's why this story has lasted for so long, not because of the gold, but instead because anyone who got close to it paid for it. And maybe that's truly the part that we're left with, the possibility that the gold was real, but the place that held it was never meant to be claimed. Maybe it's protected by the land, or by the people who lived there long before the prospectors arrived. Maybe it's cursed. Maybe it's just gone, buried under rockfall and time. After more than a century of searching, the truth is simple. If the lost lemon mine ever existed, it's still out there, and we may never know why no one has ever been able to find it again. Thanks for joining me on this eerie journey through Canada's darker corners. If you love this episode of Canadian Creepies, be sure to follow Valerie on Instagram and TikTok at Canadian Creepies. She's the one behind the socials, sharing behind-the-scenes stories, creepy photos, and sneak peeks of upcoming episodes. And if you're craving even more haunted history and twisted folklore, be sure to check out my other podcast, Down the Crooked Path. You can follow the show on Instagram and TikTok for even more haunted history, mythical madness, and spine-tingling storytelling. Come say hi, share your own creepy encounters, and help us keep the weird alive. Until next time, stay curious and stay creepy.